TruthSeekah and or its affiliates are not responsible for any strange phenomena that may occur during or after listening to this podcast, which may include the following: heightened senses of awareness, psychic abilities, UFO sightings, alien contact, time loss, out-of-body experiences, ringing in the ears, ESP, lucid dreaming, increased synchronicities, astral projection, telepathy, stronger intuition, levitation, miraculous healings, and or remote viewing. Please be advised to listen at your own discretion.
Won't you come and take me away? I just wanna be with you. Won't you come and take me away? To a place to walk on troubled seas, faith to stand when I don't believe. I just wanna be with you. Won't you come and take me away? I just wanna be with you. Won't you come?
You are now locked into the TruthSeekah Podcast.
Gargoyles! Psychics! Everything's ungodly! Dark savage!
Streaming live at TruthSeekah.com.
She's not a Christian!
Give it up, y'all.
Your portal to the paranormal, esoteric, and all things spiritual.
She's tampering in dark-sided stuff!
And now, your host, TruthSeekah.
Yo, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm your host, TruthSeekah. This is the TruthSeekah Podcast. Excited and delighted to be with you guys again today for another exciting, amazing, spiritual episode where we cover all things spiritual. We're going to tie this into spirituality, the mind, consciousness, and how all that stuff works. We're going to talk about our connection to nature, to plants, and that beautiful essence that we all have, and we feel it, and we need to get back to it. So we're going to be talking about that today. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who has supported my work via Patreon. Without Patreon, the show does not exist. We are a listener-funded show, listener-supported, so huge thank you from the bottom of my heart for everybody who believes in the work that I'm doing. So, if you want to get access to my entire discography of music, 200 plus songs. If you want to get access to our Thursday night School of the Mystics, which is the community aspect of what we're building here, guided meditations, bunch of really cool behind the scenes stuff. All of that's available over at Patreon, patreon.com/TruthSeekah. Make sure you go over there, check it out, see what I got to offer. I try to make it worth your while. Also, too, my new book is about 3 months old now, Spirit Realm, Angels, Demons, Spirits, and the Sovereignty of God, forward by Jordan Maxwell. Again, I try to cover a little bit of everything in this book when it deals with the spirit realm. There is a section in here about psychedelics and my personal journey with psilocybin mushrooms and how they changed my life and propelled me into my dream and into my destiny, and how I was able to discover that. We also have some retreats coming up where we're going to be going out in nature using Amanita muscaria. So if anybody wants to get in on that, go to TruthSeekah.com. All the info is there. And read about my story here in this book. People ask me about it all the time. Probably talk a little bit about it today too as well. So we're going to go ahead and jump into today's episode. My guest is Florian Birkmayer. Florian, welcome to the show, brother. How are you?
Thank you, TruthSeekah. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. So I had a amazing talk with your wife and business partner, Kathy Skipper, which was amazing. And she was very passionate about the work that you guys do and us returning to nature and our connection to that. That interview got a lot of views. And there was a lot of things that I was asking her on the show. And she was like, you need to talk to my husband because this is right up his alley. So it's a blessing to have you on. And if it's anywhere around the conversation that I had with her, I know this is going to be an amazing episode.
Well, she's amazing, so I don't know if I can live up to that, but I'm very excited, and we share this love for the same topic, so I'll do my best.
So what's let's just start here. So I know we're going to talk about plants and stuff like that, and how it affects the brain and our connection. But what separates y'all's work? Like hers is definitely empathic, spiritual, communicating with the plants. I know, and that's just one facet of what she brings to the table. But what do you bring to the table that kind of fits this well-rounded picture that that you guys are?
Well, I think what distinguishes our work is that we work in partnership with the aromas and other molecules as living allies. I think one thing that frustrated both of us, and especially me, is this wall of separation. There's us, our ego, and then all these material things out there, whether it's, molecules that humans have invented like Prozac, or all these, even the way most people use herbs is as material. And I think what our fundamental illness is as modern humans is this sense of disconnection. And I think that if we treat nature around us as an object, as an herb that you can buy in the store, or it's just this material and not the spirit, we're not going to heal that fundamental disconnection. And I think that's one thing. The other thing I think that's really important is so many people focus on what's wrong. And especially, I'm a psychiatrist by training. I call myself a holistic psychiatrist. And the problem is that, if you read the DSM-5, which is the book of all the diagnoses, there's no definition of what is healthy. It's like there's no way out. I always say that one of my idols is Carl Jung. And what I like about one central aspect of his work that I like is that he offers a positive definition of health. In Western medicine, it's like, as long as you're not sick, you're healthy, which is a negative definition of health. If I ask you, how do I get from here to San Diego? And you say, well, don't go that way, don't go that way, don't go that way. I still don't know what the right way forward is. And that's how it is in Western medicine, saying, oh, you don't have anxiety, you don't have high blood pressure, you're fine. And the client's like, I don't feel fine. So one thing that Jung offers is that our entire life is an opportunity to what he called individuate, or what we also like to call living our personal myth. You've alluded to that in your own journey. Instead of saying, well, I'm not sick, I'm fine, it's saying every day, every moment is an opportunity to grow, evolve, become more fully ourselves. So I think that opportunity is what distinguishes our work. And related to that is one of the gifts from Jung for me is the idea that life continues to give us challenges, and the opportunity is that we transform these challenges into stepping stones for growth. To say, oh, I'm never going to be unhappy again, that's not what we signed up for when we incarnated. It's sort of like, how do you transmute all the crud that life throws at you into the alchemical gold? That's really the opportunity. And that's, I think, what makes our work different. What
led you into this work? Was it dealing with your own trauma? Was it just your own was it your own experiences with plants or plant medicines or anything? But what was it that actually lit a fire within you to pursue this?
Well, all of the above. So I had personal trauma, which was my mother was very young when she had me, and then had a miscarriage when I was less than 18 months old. And so on a visceral sense beyond words, I know what that early childhood neglect is. And it was sort of this black hole I learned to dissociate at a really young age. So I think that was the impetus. And then really only in the last couple of years and through a lot of Kathy's work, I realized that, my mother wasn't the origin of that trauma. It was transgenerational, with her parents and my father's parents having, it's a huge can of worms, but they were living in Germany and Austria during the Nazi era and involved in that. And that I really only had the wherewithal to begin to understand in the last few years. And then in terms of my own journey, I remember in high school loving physics, but saying, well, before I can understand the molecules and the stars, we have to understand ourselves. And so in medical school, there was this calling to be holistic, and I felt that psychiatry could be holistic. I said you could treat anything from the molecule to the community. Now, modern psychiatry has pigeonholed itself into just writing pills, but that's a whole nother story. And then it was around the time of medical school in the late 90s that I went to my first purity ceremony. And it just meant I had that Kierkegaardian moment where I was naked on my knees in front of God, and it was just such a gift. And then shortly after that, I had a severe personal tragedy. One of my sisters died in a house fire, and many times people say, "Oh, I lost my faith in," and I don't mean God in the Christian sense, but sort of, the all that we are one of, or the one that we're all part of. Instead of this tragedy, which was awful and actually propelled me in my own journey further, it sort of gave me the kick in the rear to move to New Mexico, but it didn't weaken my faith in all the unseen realms. It deepened it. And then through ceremony, my own work, it's just life's gotten richer and deeper and richer. And then along the way, I discovered, I was interested in aromas already as a kid. My grandfather I remember one of the first essential oil products, it was this Swiss product. And it just went from there. I used oils in medical school to help me study. And then I really, one of the stories I feel like telling is one of the puzzles I've had even before medical school is, why do we have dopamine as a neurotransmitter? Where does that molecule come from? Why would we evolve to include that molecule in our brain? Because one of its breakdown products is actually toxic. So over time, we accumulate this toxic breakdown product in our brain. Why would nature design it that way? And I realized that both dopamine, serotonin, and a lot of these neurotransmitters were actually plant molecules long before we walked the earth. And what I came to realize is that, evolution is a lot of recycling, but it's more than that. I think it's sort of, using the same protocol, so to speak. So I think that both with dopamine and serotonin, and all these related molecules, which a lot of the psychedelics, of course, tickle the serotonin receptors. Nature, the plants wanted to be sure they could communicate with us. We weren't just plopped down here disconnected. We evolved in a natural world where our sense of smell was for survival, but it wasn't just for survival. It was like this deep relationship. I'm a backyard beekeeper, and it's so amazing. 200 million years ago, flowering plants and pollinating insects co-evolved together. And plants figured out how, the one thing that plants don't have is locomotion. So they figured out how to communicate with these insects to help them pollinate. And in many ways, they did that with us too. We evolved in this natural world surrounded by all these molecules that were constantly communicating with us. Some of them traveling through the air, smells, aromas. Some of them that we meet through ingesting the plants. And it's this connection, this welcome home that our ego has sort of tricked us into forgetting. So that's why I call the aromatic molecules the molecules of connectedness. And I know I gave you a long roundabout way of answering, but for me, this is a lifelong journey where all these different strands are woven together into this deep sense of connectedness and helping people reconnect.
Are there some plants that you, maybe use for like a daily regimen that you communicate with, whether it is some of the aromatherapy, whether it is some of the essential oils and things like that, or like take like a daily vitamin or something like that you make part of your daily routine?
Well, the first thought is that, I live in Taos, New Mexico with Kathy, and we live way up on the mountain. And so we're surrounded by juniper and pinon, and they've really become my friends. I've had many conversations with them, and just waking up in the morning, seeing them, walking outside, smelling them. A couple of days ago, Kathy says the same thing. If you keep thinking of a plant, it's like it's trying to get your attention. And even though it's middle of the winter here, I keep thinking of pinon. So I'm going to distill some and have some hydrosol. So just that daily acknowledging communication, saying good morning with the plants around us. And, the nice thing is juniper and pinon are aromatics. And what I like about both of them, they're these survivors. And they remind us that survival isn't a struggle, but this joy. When you see a pinon, its roots wrapped around a rock in this very dry, barren climate. And there's this exuberance to it. And that, it's very powerful, very protective, but there's also this joy. And that's a real nice reminder when we go into that ego pity party, all the stresses. That pinon reminds me every day, life is exuberance. In terms of essential oils, we always say that it's better to know 3 or 4 essential oils really well than to have 200 oils and not know them. And so for years, I carried a bottle of Palo Santo essential oil with me. I would anoint myself with it twice a day. I don't do that anymore because the Palo Santo told me, hey, okay, we've learned this close relationship. Just, I still use it sometimes just for personal use. And there's a parenthesis here that I've decided not to use Palo Santo anymore because it has become endangered. But that's just an example. Recently, I've just been working a lot with yarrow essential oil. Yarrow is a plant that makes this beautiful blue essential oil, and it actually is related to the myth or the archetype of the wounded healer. We feel it's the plant form. The spirit of yarrow embodies the wounded healer. And in European stories, it goes back to Chiron, who was a centaur. He was actually a very special centaur, and he is the origin of the archetype of the wounded healer. And he taught the Greek hero Achilles to use yarrow to staunch the wounds of his soldiers during the Trojan War. So literally, you can use yarrow, you can chew up the plant and put it on a cut or a scrape if you have it, like Achilles did. But it also helps with psychic wounds, psychic boundaries. So it's really one of our master allies. And what's really interesting is that Chiron, in English, the word is surgery, but in French and German, the word is chirurgie. And so the word surgery in French and German actually comes from Chiron's name. So he's like the father of surgery, but also he taught Asclepius. And then in the temples of Asclepius, the priests, when you went sought healing at a temple of Asclepius in ancient Greece, you'd spend the night there in the dormitory, and the priests would release snakes, and then in the morning they'd interpret your dreams. So Chiron is both the father of surgery and of psychoanalysis. So I use yarrow a lot. And then the other thing, I'll just put it out there, but the other thing that's really changed my life over the last few years is microdosing, with psilocybin. And I'm a little shy about it, of course, because I have a medical license, but it's a game changer. It's just, again, it's this deep relationship with this teacher, and it's really in the ongoing relationship that you get so many gifts and that sense of connectedness every day.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I don't think there should be any shame there. It's definitely something that's gaining a lot of popularity. I think you would know the medical study that's out there, and the fact that it's something good and it's helping people in so many ways. Microdosing psilocybin. So it's been something that's been very, very beautiful to me as well, and I've talked about it, and yeah, it's getting popular. It's this conversation is able to be had, and I've been having it with a lot of clergy and stuff too, people in churches and things like that. And even I'm doing my research, and there's so much information out there. Not even speaking of John D'Allegro, that's just one person, but there's so much out there about the mushrooms tie to Christianity and the Eucharist even. And so like I'm doing my research even and laying in bed and thinking about it, like you said, like it's calling to you. It's definitely something that happens. I was like a good year that it was calling me before I did it. But I was laying in bed and I was thinking about how there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about when you partake of the Eucharist or communion and you're not worthy to partake of it, that you drink and eat damnation upon yourself. And so this is something like in the Christian church, it's been like, you're not a believer, you're not born again, you got hidden sin in your life, and then you're going to get sick, because the scripture goes on to say that's why there are many who are sick among you. But we know people who partake of communion who are unbelievers or whatever, and nothing happens to them. They're perfectly fine. So there was like a download or communication that came to me, was like, it's talking about the psilocybin, it's talking about the psychedelic, because if you have not done the inner work, if you have hidden sins in your life, if you have things that you have not worked out, when you partake of the communion of the sacrament, you're going to drink or eat damnation upon yourself. You're going to have a bad encounter. You may see hell, you may experience hell. But if you're doing the inner work, if you're making sure that you're on this hero's journey and you're right where you're supposed supposed to be, and you've been dealing with the trauma and things like that, you're going to have a beautiful encounter and see heaven and maybe even talk to enlightened beings, the angels or whatever. So this connection that's there, and there's been a lot of work that's been put out ahead of us, but it's a very interesting concept of, the use of mushrooms in any manner, but for it, like in Christianity and the mushroom cults and things like that. Have you done any research on that? Any ties to religion?
It's funny that you mentioned that, because the first thought years ago already, I was reading about the Good Friday experiment, which was one of the seminal experiments in psychedelics in the late 50s. And again, there was, what it really boils down to is intentionality. And I think, I'm an ex-Catholic, so I'm still in recovery. But the word sin is interesting because, sin can be used as, there are words that can hurt or cause harm.
Yeah.
So what does sin really mean? And I think sin is that we have a choice, and we can either choose to repeat the unconsciousness, the traumas inherited over generations, pretend it didn't happen, or that, that weren't perpetrators in our ancestry, or we can say, no, I need to confront this. I need to feel this. So that's one level of sin. And I think, there's many things I want to say, but the first thing I want to say is, one of the things I'm convinced about in reading Jung and really working with my own psyche is I feel that the psyche, the collective unconscious spirit, never gives us more than we can digest at any given time. But at the same time, we know that unconscious forces like addiction can destroy us. So how do you resolve that paradox? Well, the way to resolve that paradox is if we face what our psyche, what soul, what spirit gives us and say, okay, I'm going to face this, I'm going to feel it, then it never gives us more than we can digest. If we avoid it through addiction and through all these other patterns, through ego, then it will destroy us. There's a story in Jung's sort of mythic autobiography called Memories, Dreams, Reflections, where he had this client who refused to go into his own depth and became obsessed with mountain climbing, and then had a mountain climbing accident and died. And Jung felt that his spirit, his soul kept calling him into his depth, and he avoided it by symbolically climbing mountains. And like in a video game, at some point, his soul said to him, I've given you so many chances to call you. You haven't listened. Game over. And I think that's what you're talking about with when we're not ready to receive spirit, the Eucharist. I think it's about our intention. If we do it for ego purposes, and those are not all, there's sort of a conscious layer of ego purposes, but the ego also has unconscious patterns. And we encounter that, when we encounter spirit, if we're trapped in the ego, like you're saying, when we're in that quote unquote sin,
yeah,
the ego will throw up different barriers. One is it's not important, or all that unconscious stuff, all these dreams, all these visions, it's not important. Or it'll say, oh, it's scary. The other thing, the ego will often say, oh, it's too late. It's too late to change your ways. And those are all barriers. And if we're really humble and honest, we can recognize those ego barriers as signs that we're going in exactly the right direction. And I agree with you. I think in many traditions, all over the world, there are psychedelic plants and even aromas. We work a lot with aromas because, the ego stays a little more intact. But we've seen in our work, when you have aromas that are alive, they change you similar to psychedelics. People, trauma that's been buried will come up, perspectives will come up, and that's the gift. And we have to open it. I think that sort of that readiness to receive is just that intentionality, like I'm ready, and a certain humility that I'm open to receive whatever comes up.
Yeah, that's one thing that we talk about when you decide to move forward, is that it's going to make you look at the stuff that you've been suppressing. And that's the sin, especially the stuff that's hurting you. Like even the word repent, and it, coming from the Christian paradigm, repent is simply turn from the things that are killing you. If you're in addiction, you're in a relationship, if there's trauma in your life, it's going to show it to you. The reason that you've been running people out of your life is this. Are you willing to deal with it? And I love what you said. It's a gift that it allows us to see that. There's so many people, we talk about this all the time. I interview healers and psychics and people from all walks of life, and people are championing they champion the inner work. Like now it's something sexy now for us to talk about dealing with ego, dealing with trauma, healing our soul wounds, and, you know, cleansing our family lineage and DNA, and for the sins of our ancestors that we're paying for now, and fixing that. So it's something that's popular right now. And I think that, you know, just, you know, what you and your wife are doing is amazing, because the plants are crying out. They are calling out for us, and we need someone to interpret it. For many people, it's a foreign language, and we have no idea what they're saying. But for someone who has a relationship with these plants and with these teachers, we need somebody to interpret that to the rest of humanity. And I think, you know, there's so many people who are doing a great job, and you guys are some of them.
Thank you. And I agree with you. As you said, nature's calling us desperately. And the ego just creates this illusion of separateness. So it's like a double forgetting. We forgot that we were connected, and then we forgot that there was ever such a thing as connection. And that's the invitation. Years ago, I had this elderly client, this guy, and he was just complaining about everything, you know, just this endless list of all the things that were wrong in his life. And he was in his 80s. So, you know, first of all, be grateful you're alive. But this phrase came through me that I can't take any credit for other than just hearing it and saying it to him. And that was like, well, as he was complaining, I said, well, this is what the angels are jealous of us for. There is this unique opportunity when we choose to incarnate, you know, and in Chinese, the word for human means between heaven and earth. We're both physical and spiritual. And so we have this opportunity to reconnect from this place of disconnection. Do you remember the old game, pin the tail on the donkey? You know, you put the blindfold on and then you try to pin the tail on the donkey. The whole point of that game is to wear the blindfold. If you didn't wear a blindfold, it'd be the most boring game in the world. Oh, there's the donkey. I'm going to stick the tail right there. So in a way, when we incarnate, we're playing a cosmic game of pin the tail on the donkey. So we have to sort of start from this place of disconnection and then shed the ego. And that's, I mean, as you said, nature is everywhere around us calling us. And again, that's where I'm going to put the word sin in quotation marks, but the ego will say, oh, don't go there, don't do that, focus on yourself. And the awe and the humility and that sense of belonging that we feel when we connect with nature through aroma, through psychedelic molecules, through being in nature, you know, just even going into nature for real, not just going to a zoo or a park and saying, oh, there's a nice, you know, but really exposing yourself to nature, you feel enveloped by it. And we all deserve that feeling of being hugged.
Yeah, one thing that I remember Kathy saying that really stuck with me was going out in nature, emphasis on by yourself.
Yes.
Going out alone. And so that was one thing that stuck with me. And since then, I had this inkling to return back to nature with fire, to go back and just build a small fire in my backyard and communicate with fire and things like that, and just being there and being in nature. And it's so beautiful. But then my family joined me as well, so they were able to come out too. But it's something about going out by yourself that stuck with me. One thing that I asked Kathy too, and she had no experience with this, I want to ask you, but dealing with the Amanita muscaria mushroom, have you had any encounters with that strand at all?
Well, there is, of course, you know, a long European tradition, and you mentioned the Eucharist and the Christian imagery, and there's the work of Carl Ruck, who, I forget the names of the book now, but he went all over churches in Europe, and the iconography is everywhere. And as a little kid, you know, there were these folk songs about Amanita that are, you know, personify Amanita and acknowledge that there's a spirit and a being there. So it was very much in my cultural field. And then I remember some years ago going mushroom hunting with a friend of mine near Taos, and it was early in the season, and I started singing one of those childhood songs, and all of a sudden, I kid you, I mean, I didn't see any mushrooms, and I started singing these songs, and all of a sudden, the Amanitas popped up everywhere, so we can communicate with them. And I ingested it once a long time ago, and I think I just wasn't ready, so I didn't feel much, but there are, you know, different approaches to it. One is to dry it, to turn the muscarine into 5-hydroindolaminic acid. Well, the other thing is if you have a reindeer, you feed it to the reindeer and drink the reindeer urine, but I don't
or
have any
salmon.
Yes, exactly. But you can do that by drying it too. And I believe every teacher really reveals itself at the time when it's ready. I had the same experience of singing and talking I had with Epilanthus micromera. It's a small cactus in near the Mexican border along the Rio Grande. The nickname is false peyote or black peyote. And again, I was hiking in this very barren, beautiful landscape, knowing and I started this conversation in my head with them. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't see any. And all of a sudden, as the conversation proceeded and we sort of got to know each other, I realized I'd been walking among them for the last half hour. And all of a sudden, I realized I had to be really careful not to step on them because they were everywhere. So that deep relationship, you can have talking, you can have it through the aroma. Not all plants are aromatic. But you can communicate on that subtle level even without an aroma. Kathy wrote a beautiful class. I wrote a few chapters of it called Intuitive Plant Communication. We can have that purely spiritual connection with any plant, especially trees, just by tuning into them. And then, of course, the Eucharist, the whole idea of communing with a plant. And that's what's so amazing, that plants allow us to eat them. Of all the things that could be toxic and stuff, there's all these plants that they're perfectly okay with us ingesting them, similar to, maybe it's not exactly the same, but with the pollinating insects, there's this give and take. The bee makes the honey and helps the plant along the way. And I think that years ago, I would go walk my dogs every night. And every night, this was like in January, February, there was this beautiful, huge bar owl. And and sometimes it would sit on a fence and we were like maybe 6-10 feet from each other. And we just look at each other, and I told a friend about it. And he said, well, you realize that owl needs you as much as you need it. The plants need us to acknowledge them. And we need to acknowledge them also. And in a way, that's what prayer is and ceremony is, that realizing that there's someone talking back, that it's not just one way.
So we get into a lot of the spiritual stuff, and we talk about like communicating with angels and things like that. And we also talk about the elements and stuff as well, elementals and the fairies and things, that kind of the spirit behind the elements, right? And so people would do like guided meditations to meet their guardian angel, things like that. I do meditations to encounter Jesus and things like that. So would you suggest doing a meditation in a form of a prayer to try to communicate in nature with the plants? Who wants to speak to me, who has a message for me, and just kind of put the intention out there to be open? And then how would that work? Maybe it would be just like a download or just some type of impression that you would receive, or it would show up in some other way in your life. How would something like that work?
Well, again, it's an ongoing relationship. So it's not, like the first time you meet someone, you might not give them the bear hug that you give your oldest friend. So it's, the first thing that happens is you notice it or you think about it. Like, especially in the desert, one thing I love about living in the desert, there'll be these tiny plants. And if you were in a jungle, you wouldn't see them if you were 5 feet away. And in the desert, these tiny survivors, these little cacti and other things, you can sometimes see them from like 100 feet away or even further. You can feel they have these tiny bodies and these huge spirits. So if your mind keeps going to it, it's already reaching out to you. And then some of them I've learned, you enter their field already at a great distance. So you just approach them really mindfully and almost like ask permission, maybe get a little closer and tune in, especially with big trees. We were in Northern California in November, and these redwoods, and it's like, being amongst whales, you can't just go up to it and hug it. I mean, you could, but I actually, it like pushed me over because I was just standing there and literally fell over. So depending on the energy of the plant, you'll enter their field, feel it, and then approach it with respect. And every step closer you take, tune in. When there's an aroma, it's helpful because we're wired to smell aromas, but don't let it distract you, because the aroma, it's not just, oh, that smells nice. The aroma is a vehicle it's like a language, it's a message. And so then there are, in Kathy's plant communication class, she talks more about the different stages. And then there's sort of traps. And one trap is sort of having too many ego expectations. And another trap is getting like too emotional. So we have to become these empty vessels. I always talk about heart awareness, the sort of mental awareness where we focus with our predator eyes on something. And heart awareness, the other analogy to that is like what they call the soft eye in horses, where you're just like an empty vessel. Just receive, and you have too much of an agenda. Yes, you want to meet the plant, but then just leave it at that, and the plant will show you. And then it's something I would do again and again and again. You'll get information from the plant, and it's not necessarily words. And sometimes we use words, of course, to try and capture it, but it'll be at this much deeper level. And then with a particular communication, at some point you realize, okay, this conversation is over. And then I recommend keep going back to it over time. And what will happen is that, you'll be in your kitchen and all of a sudden, either if it's an aromatic plant, the scent will just pop into your nose, even though it's nowhere near, or you'll think of it, like I mentioned. And that's, again, sometimes a sign from the plant, hey, there's something I need to tell you. And then if you have the essential oil handy, great. Or if the plant is nearby, go and visit it. And it's really a relationship. It's not just a one-off. So I think that's really the essence of communication, is remembering this relationship. And I guess the other thing related to a lot of what we internalize in the modern world is remember we're worthy. There's often this, I'm just intellect, I'm just ego, I'm not worthy. And I think the gift when the plants open up to us is we are worthy. They're waiting for us.
That's good. Talked to one of my friends because my wife is severely allergic to poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac. It just spreads. It's really, and he was talking about how they're kind of like on the outskirts of the forest, and they almost serve as the protectors of the forest, or maybe they're protecting this tree, or maybe they're protecting what's behind it, and make sure that you're careful when you walk through there. I also remember back in the day I was working for the city, and we had to weed eat a big ditch, and we were weed eating, but we didn't know any better, but we started weed eating elephant ears, and we're just weed eating the elephant ears, and then it burned our skin so bad. We had no idea what it was going to do. And so there's these different plants and stuff like that are kind of serve as protectors. Would you call some of those plants protectors?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what it is, it's a calling for mindfulness. It's like the Zen monasteries where they beat the students with sticks while you're trying to meditate. And maybe that's a little egoic, but I think that, I thought we didn't have poison ivy in New Mexico. And then my oldest stepson, he just moved here, went fishing and got exposed. And ever since then, just tuning into the energy of the plant. Now when we're, scrambling along the streams fishing, you just get this intuitive hit. And the similar with cacti. I love cacti. I've grown cacti at home since I was a little kid. But of course, you don't want to get stuck by the spine. So you learn this, it's always fascinating about my dogs. They'd be running through the desert and somehow they never ended up with too many cactus spines in their paws, because there's sort of like this awareness. And I think it's like, when you said you didn't know any better whacking the weeds, it's another way in which to be aware. Like when people first move to the desert, they get stuck by cactuses all the time, but cactuses are also these beautiful beings. And so they just teach you how to be aware and to move. The same with the poisonous plants, there are many different teachers, and it's about awareness and respect. It's not just, I can ingest any plant or I can roll in a cactus. Each plant teaches us something, and it's part of that beautiful network that weave. There's in Celtic tradition, they talk about the weave, which is, all that energy that connected all. It's sort of like the internet of aromas and plants that's all around us, and we don't need a computer or a phone to tap into it. Our being is our network, and each of them has something to teach us. And sometimes the lesson is a little bit harsher, and sometimes the lesson is more subtle.
Let me ask you about this too. What about cannabis and our brain and cannabinoid receptors, are we made to communicate with this plant or to ingest it or process its chemicals?
Well, I think that's a huge topic, and let me start. So I had a holistic psychiatric practice, and then I really got awakened back in 2015 to how I was a wounded healer that hadn't fully dealt with my wound. And through that, even though I wanted to be the best psychiatrist and always be there for my clients, I realized as good as I wanted to be, I kept the clients trapped in the client role. And so I had to stop what I was doing. But the one thing I kept continuing to do, because I felt, having prescribed at that point psychiatric medications for almost 20 years, I actually felt guilty near the end, most of my practice was helping people get off meds, but I felt really guilty for all the damage I'd caused, both, the literal damage from these psych meds and also the spiritual damage, because when you give someone a pill, you're sending them a message, you're so messed up, you need to be on medication, which is a really disempowering message. So I kept continuing. And I was one of the first people in New Mexico to certify for medical cannabis. When the law first became operational back in 2009, people found me, and it was beautiful because so many stories of, I had countless clients who were completely dysfunctional, who through cannabis, used with the right intention, and I'll get to that later, they were able to turn their lives around. One guy had been labeled schizophrenic, was on all these meds. His girlfriend had taken the kids to Florida, then she died. And through cannabis, he pulled himself together so much that he got his kids back from the Florida custody system, which is a really difficult system to deal with. There are countless examples. One lady that was working as a stripper because she was so traumatized, the next year when I renewed her, I didn't recognize her. She'd become a realtor. I mean, she didn't just, move up a little bit. She jumped several rungs on the socioeconomic. And there's countless stories, veterans that couldn't function who, really got their life. And that's when people say, what does cannabis do? I would say the best thing it can do is give you your life back. Now, what's happened is, it's a healing plant. It's had wisdom for millennia. And the problem is that, of course, then human ego comes in and says, oh, well, we can make money off of this and we can tweak it to fit our needs. So on the one hand, the industry is evolving and we're learning more about how to use it. And I'm, smoking, even though cannabis smoke isn't as bad as cigarette smoke, having been in India a couple of years ago and seeing really bad air pollution, I feel like inhaling small particulates is just not that great. So, now there's vaping and edibles, and the ratio of CBD to THC and even the other cannabinoids, CBG and CBN. And so there's this burgeoning knowledge. But I think the shadow side of that is that, in a way, my wife and I went to look at a dispensary a few years ago in New Mexico, and the plants were all, on these trusses and stuff and with artificial lights. And it was almost like slavery,
Wow.
Humans have taken the healing gift of the plant and they're turning it into an industry. And Colorado is just north of us, and it's been really good economically for Colorado, but there's sort of this gold rush mentality. And that's really the shadow side of it. And there's, every being, all of us have a gift, a light side and a shadow side. And if you know a little bit about cannabis, it's actually kind of it uses a lot of water. And in a way, that's the shadow of it, is that greediness. And when you meet people in the cannabis, there are many people in the cannabis industry that have really healing intention, but there are also people that get a little greedy. They get and so that's I think there's great potential. And, cannabinoids exist in all sorts of plants, and even whales have cannabinoid receptors. So, our bodies have cannabinoid receptors. And when we ate a very plant-based diet, it's speculated, ingesting cannabinoids all the time that were regulating our, these cannabinoid receptors in our body are involved in homeostasis, preventing inflammation. I mean, they serve all these purposes. So I think if we live in a healthy relationship with what the plant can teach us, that's something that's really, we've become even more disconnected from. But the shadow side of that is, out of this disconnection, people have taken it and the industry has become very greedy. And I think that a rightful place where we are in deep relationship to nature, that's, again, the whole story about how cannabis ended up on the Harrison Narcotics Act and how it was outlawed and how that had to do with the DuPont Chemical Company and the racism of Harry Anslinger. So there were these ego agendas, fossil fuel-based products. We got to get rid of hemp. Oh, and, similar to now, there was all this racism. And so one way to feed the racism was that the Mexicans were using cannabis and poisoning the youth. These are horrible things. This is a sacred healing plant that's been in many traditions all over the world. And then ego poisoned our relationship to it. And now it's, from that place of disconnection and ego poisoning, we have to find a way back to a healthy relationship with cannabis, which I think is important. And like any power plant, not just cannabis, but other plants, it can possess you. If you're not respectful enough, in a way, that's what respect and ritual is sort of to have healthy boundaries, to learn the lessons without being possessed. It can happen with any power plant, but we're sort of finding our way back to that. And along the way, of course, there's the industry and the greed and modern life.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to the Bible and religion again, and this time with cannabis, there's some study in the Old Testament where people would say that the original oils that were made out of cannabis, some of the anointing oil that they would use as a balm to put on people and to heal people and to put on their skin and things like that. Have you done any research on that as far as like cannabis in the scriptures in the Old Testament? There's a word that's used, and I don't know the exact word. I think it's in Ezekiel. Have you looked into that at all?
I have. I've done a little more research on what the ancient Egyptians did and the Romans, and I vaguely remember the Hebrew. I mean, it's at the tip of my tongue now, but the Hebrew word for cannabis. And again, both the Hebrew word, which I don't remember now, and even the word cannabis, it has to do with, it's this very useful plant. It has many uses. And if I remember correctly, cannabis products, I forget in what form, were used in the embalming process for the ancient Egyptians. And related to that, again, the Egyptians, to me, had the most amazing spiritual technology related to power plants and specifically aromas. One of the power plants that the ancient Egyptians used, sorry to jump topic a little bit, is the blue lotus, which has an aroma. It's a very subtle aroma. It's very hard to create. As far as I know, there's no one actually making it right now because, well, who knows why. But the blue lotus was so important to the Egyptians that it was actually in the creation myth, in the myth of creation, when the sky and the earth separate, their child is the blue lotus. So it's like the first thing that happens in the creation of the universe is the birth of this blue lotus. And one of the roles of the pharaoh was to be able to ingest more blue lotus than anybody else. He was kind of the sacrificial lamb. And once you know what the blue lotus looks like, it's everywhere in Egyptian iconography. And then, of course, opium also, the poppy seed pods are everywhere in the iconography. So they had all these deep relationships. And aromatic-wise, there's a substance called labdanum, which is the resin of a bush called the cistus bush. And Egyptian pharaohs would put it in their beards. And in fact, the archetypal pharaoh was Osiris, the brother of Isis, and he has two wands in his hand. One is a crook, like a bishop's crook, and the other one is what's called a flail. And in fact, that was a labdanum collecting tool. And when they put it in their beard, now you see people, all these guys have beards, and there's these beard grooming products, and they'll say with labdanum. But the Egyptians didn't put it in their beards to look good. They did it as sophisticated spiritual technology. Labdanum to us is the master of the shadow. It really brings up the issues you need to confront that are buried in your unconscious. Imagine if you had like the labdanum in front of your face, like the Egyptian beard at all times. And of course, they also use cannabis. And then again, the Romans, grew cannabis all over Europe. And that was part of, I'm jumping topics again, how they became so successful for a while, that they knew what plants they needed to collaborate with for rope and hemp, and then even it's only passed down through the Roman historian, I think Pliny, but he talks about the Scythians. So there was this tribe in Europe before there were the modern countries, and he talks about them doing sweat lodge with cannabis. So putting the cannabis on the hot rocks in the sweat lodge, and then they'd be roaring with laughter. He said, of course, he didn't fully understand because he was just a Roman guy, but there's this ancient tradition of all these different ways of using it. I don't know as much about the details in the Bible, but all over the world, people have used it and had been in deep relationship with it.
Yeah, I think it's Exodus 30, 22 and 23. Let's see the word here. Cassia, I think is the word. 500, and it's just telling you how to make this oil to heal and to anoint. And like you said, they would use it in their beard and things like that. And then you see the beard oil stuff coming out really big now. Two questions here. First one, because you mentioned Blue Lotus, it kind of sounded like you didn't really vouch for smoking any type of plants, like whether it's tobacco or marijuana, using it. I've smoked Blue Lotus before, ordered some online. Is that, would you recommend smoking it or not?
Well, I think, again, to refine that point, and thank you for following up on that, it depends on the intentionality. Having gone to peyote ceremony and having smoked sacred tobacco with intention, I would venture that if someone only smoked tobacco with sacred intention, only during prayer, that they wouldn't get lung cancer. And in a way, the diseases that tobacco is causing is the shadow of that teacher plant, because people are using it in an unconscious way. Like I said earlier, if you use it consciously, it'll teach you. If you use it unconsciously, it can destroy you. This is, in terms of smoking cannabis, of course, it's the traditional way of using it. And there is something about breath and smoke. In many spiritual traditions, the word for breath is the same as the word for spirit. It's pneuma in Greek. And so there's this whole awareness. The first thing we do when we're born is inhale. The last thing when we die, before we die, is exhale. So there's this whole thing about conscious breath and communing with a plant on that way. I think that statement came from knowing that a lot of my clients that are certified for medical cannabis didn't like smoking, were worried about it, and maybe needed cannabis so often, because when you smoke it, it's active for about 2 to 3 hours. But when you have cancer or other chronic pain, you don't want to be smoking every couple of hours. So I think that it's about the judicious use of it. If you smoke with intention in a ceremony, I think that's good. But if you're smoking all day, every day, it takes a toll. And
that's about half of our audience right now.
I met the guy years ago. I went to a cannabis conference, and there was this really old guy who'd been studying the effects of cannabis and smoking cannabis on lungs for 20, 30 years. And, it doesn't cause lung cancer. It doesn't cause all the things that tobacco smoke causes. And again, I don't mean to knock tobacco. And again, tobacco is a plant that's been enslaved, where they're removing the nicotine, adding urea, but that's a whole other thing. But I think that many people just need simple rules. So if you have a high need for cannabinoids in your system because of chronic illness, whether it's PTSD or pain or cancer, I think ingesting the right cannabinoids in the right mixture, and what's important is the ratio of CBD to THC, and of course the terpenes. That will be a cornerstone, and then you can use the smoke more intentionally, but you're not constantly chasing the adequate blood level of cannabinoids. Yeah. So I think, and again, I think for people who think, I went to a pain conference a few years ago, and there was a very mainstream milquetoast doctor there, and he was talking about how to ethically or correctly prescribe pain pills. And, cannabis, there's been studies now that in states where medical cannabis is available, the number of opiate prescription goes down, the number of people dying from opiate overdoses goes down. And I've seen that firsthand, all these people that were able to come off both opiates and other meds with the help of cannabis. And then this guy said, yeah, but how do you prescribe a joint or something? And so there's, that stereotype that the only way to have a relationship with cannabis is by smoking it. I guess that was my point, is that we're learning all these other ways of having deep relationship with the cannabis, ingesting it, juicing it. In raw cannabis, as you know, the cannabinoids are in the acid form; they're not decarboxylated. And recently, we've experimented with using CBD, and you can ingest CBD or CBDA because the body turns it into a CBD, and then adding. I often tell people to add, if you're not interested in the teachings of THC, just add a little bit of THC to boost the CBD, because many people try pure CBD and say, oh, it doesn't work. Well, pure CBD is very poorly absorbed by the body. So if you add a touch of THC, it dramatically boosts the effects. And if you just add a touch and you take a lot more CBD, the CBD protects you from, if you're not interested in the teachings of THC, the CBD will protect you from that. But then recently a friend of ours gave us non-decarboxylated raw THC rosins. It was THCA, and that works just as well. So for people that are worried about ingesting even a little bit of THC, ingesting THCA with the CBD works really, really well too. So this is, again, these are all things we're learning as we're deepening in our relationship with the plant. And I think smoking in a ceremonial way and an intentional way has a part of that. But for many people, you can deepen your relationship with the cannabis in other ways too. Yeah,
that's from the research that I've done is exactly what you said. But I think that a lot of these places, maybe where it's THC is still illegal, they're pushing the notion that you don't that it doesn't have any THC in it and you don't need it. But it's like THC is like the inhibitor, that kind of gives you, it kind of activates it. And so there's all of these people saying, no, it doesn't have any THC in it. It's fine. I was like, hold on, you need THC for it to even work, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look, the plant has an intelligence. In the plant, both the molecules exist. And, what Kathy said, and it's really brilliant, is there's this philosophy, and I think it's true, that the plants that grow around us create the molecules we need. So if we just seeded cannabis everywhere in the wild, the THC CBD ratio in those plants where you live would be exactly what you need. And so there's two, again, human ego errors or ego traps. One is that ever since people figured out that THC is the mind-altering molecule, they've been breeding these strains, human-imposed, to maximize the THC content, and then that imbalances the plant. And the other thing is, of course, human-imposed, instead of saying the genius is in the whole plant, saying, oh, it's just the CBD. And, in a way, it's the blessing of the CBD products that are out there now is people are getting reacquainted with the idea that cannabis can be healing, and very conservative, very mainstream people are saying, oh, wow, have you heard of CBD? So that's a kind of like their consciousness is being visited by the spirit of the plant. So it's sort of opening the door just a little crack, and then they say, well, what else is there? But again, pure CBD products, the downside is that their human ego, the idea that a single pure molecule is better than the whole plant is, again, an ego idea that's not true. We know that the spirit and the genius is in the whole plant, including all the other cannabinoids and all the other molecules that are in the plant.
Awesome. Let me ask you about this. Have you done any research into DDD?
I don't know what DDD is right now.
So depersonalization, derealization disorder.
Oh, thank you. Oh, DID, sorry. So dissociative identity disorder, maybe, and there's all these new
different names, yeah. Yeah, so, I say that because, and there's some comments here. Someone says that it's not a good idea to ingest marijuana, THC, before the age of 25. I grew up doing it as a kid. We were smoking a lot of weed as a kid, and I experienced, this DDD, which scared the hell out of me. Took a long time for me to kind of come back to reality. Felt like I was trapped in a dream state. Nothing was real. My mind worked differently. Very scary. And felt like I went to sleep and woke up the next day and still felt like I was in a dream for months after. Maybe still a touch of it now. Like it's not the same, whether the brain was still developing, the hippocampus, and still developing, and you're messing with it. What is your studies on that? Because there's a lot of research saying that it doesn't always do it, but for a lot of people, marijuana can induce that state of DDD.
Yeah. So there's many things to say about that. The first thing is to just as a practical advice, even if people have a lot of experience with smoking cannabis, ingesting it is a different animal. The body process is it's a different experience. So even if someone is a heavy smoker of cannabis, I would recommend starting ingesting with a low dose and getting acquainted with it. The second topic you touch on is, again, the whole what is safe for children. And I agree. Our brain actually continues to grow throughout life, but there's a huge burst of activity and brain growth in teenage years up to the mid-20s. And a lot of major psychiatric disorders, that's when they first manifest because something goes wrong in that growth process, whether it's bipolar or schizophrenia.
Yeah.
So I think that adolescent brains are particularly sensitive. And I think that this is one of the problems we have, is that we lost the connection with the ancestors. We lost the connection with being truly initiated. I've certainly certified. The youngest patient I ever certified was, I think, a 2-year-old girl who had sickle cell anemia. And, with the pain, I'd rather see with parents who were very educated about cannabis, I'd rather they give her tiny amounts of cannabis than put her on opiates at age 2. And I've certified a lot of mostly teenagers with severe autism and stuff, where I know that the benefits of the cannabis outweigh the risks. But again, that is with healing intention, with parents who are very much saying, okay, we're using this for healing purpose. The problem in modern life, again, is, we don't have any puberty rites anymore. We don't have any initiations anymore. So kids get exposed. And now, again, the distorted strains, the strains that have been cultivated to maximize THC, which is unnatural. And there's no one to teach them, how do you respectfully use this plant? So, of course, things go wrong. And I looked into this quite a lot. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, there were several huge studies that using cannabis in adolescents increases the risk of psychosis. But I think that one of the studies implied that there were certain people that were sensitive to it. And again, the modern strains where the THC is just imbalanced. THC by itself is, I've sometimes even prescribed Marinol, which is pure THC in a pill form, and people really don't like it because it doesn't have the intelligence of the plant in it. So if we could initiate adolescents in the proper use, the respectful, and it's the same with alcohol, growing up in Europe, and yes, it's changing now because they started having binge drinking in Germany and stuff, but when we grew up in Austria, the adults were drinking, and you learned how, and there's other layers to that, but you kind of learned, and there wasn't this binge drinking. And then I came to college in the States, and my first couple of days on campus, I went to all these keggers, all these frat parties, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like completely alien. It's like as if you'd picked me up and dropped me on Mars. The way people were standing around a keg and just chugging it was completely alien to how we had been initiated into using alcohol in Europe. And with that initiation comes all sorts of unspoken rules. I had a friend who grew up in France, and in high school they had wine for lunch. But again, you didn't get wasted. You just had a little bit of wine, so you learn how to work with it. And there are other dimensions to that. But when we don't have the initiation, it's the same with, why is adolescence the time when people are prone to psychosis, bipolar, schizophrenia, and I'll get back to the dissociation in a minute. In the old days, we had initiation rites, and it is a period of transformation. And modern life is really traumatic. Even if people didn't touch cannabis or high THC cannabis during adolescence, I think a lot of them are going crazy from just living in modern life, disconnected, without any guidance, without that relatedness we talk about. And if we had that relatedness and the proper teachers and initiators, then you could learn how to use it properly. And in terms of that dissociation, again, what that makes me think of is, it has to do with being initiated. Is your vessel strong enough? Again, for psychedelic therapy and in large enough doses, cannabis can be very profoundly psychedelic. Your vessel needs to be strong enough, and that's no joke. If your vessel isn't strong enough, and you meet a power plant, it can destroy you. It can take you over. That's all part of that teaching that we've lost as a culture. And again, it applies to cannabis and modern life in general.
It's interesting you say that, just talking about the initiation, because and how severe it can be. I mean, there were initiations in the ancient world where if you didn't make it through, you were done. You died.
Yes.
You died in the maze. You died when you had to fight the bear or whatever it was. Like, there's some really interesting initiation rites, and that was the thing. Like, and that's how they kept their warriors there. Like, look, we only need, these strong guys who are going to protect, the tribes and things like that. It's very interesting. And then when it comes in, and then also too, a lot of times those were some of the physical things you would go through, but a lot of the other things it was with the psychedelics, or eating. I've heard about Native Americans eating a handful of fire ants, and when they bite your insides, it releases some type of poison that puts you in some type of psychedelic trance as well. Or they'll let you go through the pyramid rituals and things like that on psychedelics, and then when you meet the man at the end, you really think he's a monster because he's wearing a suit and you have to get past him, and all of these really interesting things. And when this was in 2015, but when I had my encounter with psilocybin on the Native American land, which is my heritage, it was communicated with me that this is a rite of passage. All of your ancestors have done this, and you're standing on, just like Moses, you're standing on sacred ground. We've called you here. This is by no accident. It's lost. It's a lost art, but you found it. You've tapped into it, and it was the most beautiful experience of my life that changed my life. But it's definitely a rite of passage that has been lost in the West. And like you said, the college thing, for me, in my mind, is the only type of initiation we have. Hazing experiments and can you drink the keg, all of these weird things that they do to kind of initiate you into these fraternities, these Greek fraternities or whatever. Is the only thing close that we have to this coming of age thing. I do remember in elementary school, a friend of mine who was he was a Native American as well, but he missed school for a week because he was going through an initiation in the desert with his family. He turned, I think it was like 10 years old or something, and they brought him out to the desert and fasted and led him through this experience. And he came back and he had, I don't know if he had marks on him or what, but he went through this initiation, something that his elders, his grandfather, his parents continued to keep up, but it's lost in the West.
Yeah, well, there's so many things you say that resonate. First of all, God bless you for doing that, because you really felt it and you put yourself through it. So kudos to you, because it's, that's really the gift. And again, psilocybin, the mushrooms, in my experience, are profoundly ancestral. They really get us in touch with the ancestors. And, one of the books I read a long time ago that I really liked was Mircea Eliade's book on shamanism. He was very influenced by Jung, and the one downside in that book is he really ignores psychedelics because of his own lack of experience, and I think that book was written in the 30s or 40s. But he talks about that the shamanic initiation is really a death process, and that's really the archetypal story. And before that death process, people who are called, who have the gift, often feel like they're crazy, and that's the flip side of what teenagers are going through. Is I have several shaman, I mean, they don't like the word shaman, but medicine man friends in the tribes around here. And they said, before I figured out that this was my calling, I thought I was insane. I thought I was going crazy. So again, when a young person is struggling, now we put them on an antipsychotic, which is horrible. Instead of saying, well, this is a gift, and it's a heavy gift to carry, but here's how you can get initiated into it. We've lost that. And I would much rather these kids that have these experiences be initiated properly and share their gift instead of shut up and take your pills, and that's so the nice thing is, you're one of us. You found that connection, and that's the opportunity for all of us. And a lot of us, we're stabbing blindly because we've been so cut off. In Europe, I read this wonderful book by Ralph Metzner that came out, I think 20 years ago, called The Well of Remembrance. And already the Romans were trying to wipe out the old nature religions, and then, sent 2,000 years of the nature religions being suppressed, oppressed, or then being like falsely claimed. I mean, that's what often happens, is that people pretend that they have some ancestral connection, like the Nazis with the Aryans, which they completely made up. So that's what you often get. And I think that's actually going back to the college hazing and fraternities. We have that hunger, we have that inclination, we have that anatomy in our psyche that wants that experience. And so then modern forces hijack that for their own purposes. Fraternities do it, with all these virtual reality and stuff. I think that's what's happening. Is like these companies are colonizing our unconscious. When we were kids, we didn't have that virtual reality, the dreams we had, the visions we had. We could go into those realms, and now those realms are being pre-programmed for us. And in fact, the origins of virtual reality are these guys, the early computer makers, dropping acid.
Sure.
But I think when you have that genuine experience through psilocybin, through other sacred plant medicines, it's real. But when someone plays the videotape for you, it's not yours, and that's something we really have to be careful of with all this virtual reality now, because those are not real. There's an agenda there, and they're colonizing our soul.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's a form of escapism. It is fun. Technology is fun, but it's definitely a form of escapism when any of this stuff is abused, or when you can't live without any of it, right? Going back again, I say that about the marijuana thing. Like, can you do a week without it? What would happen? Like, you start to show impulses. You get angry. You know what I'm saying? You need the weed, like, to function, to be clear-headed. And so I think that anytime we need something, I may be the same with coffee for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I go a day or two without coffee, I'm going to have a killer headache. My body is used to the caffeine and to the sugar, you know what I'm saying? So you're going to feel the effects of it. But I don't think that we should bow to anything. I think that we should have a relationship with it all. But as far as we need it to survive, or we need it every day, it becomes something outside of ourselves that completes us. I had a question here from Christy Johnson. Wants to know your experience and knowledge with kratom. Have you tried kratom, or have you looked into it at all? It's become Scheduled 1 here in Alabama now, so it was helping so many people get off of opiates and heroin addiction. But now, hey, we got Suboxone for you. Come get it from us. It's illegal. Like, you'll go to jail for a long time if they catch you with it.
Well, it's interesting, because I'd heard about kratom. I've tried it, and it's certainly, again, there are all sorts of molecules in kratom. There's a certain intelligence in the plant. But I have, over the years, it's extremely rare, but I've probably in 20 years encountered a couple of people who then felt they had an unhealthy relationship with kratom, where they felt they were addicted to it. But overall, I think, and Suboxone, again, it's a double-edged sword. When it first came out, it was such a relief because it's a partial agonist, and I don't want to bore you with that. But I saw again and again that when you really listen to people, instead of making them stay in the program forever, most people are able to lower their dose of Suboxone and often come off it after a while. Of course, the drug companies and the whole system doesn't want you to do that. And now Suboxone's become an industry. So that early promise, again, was hijacked in the name of money. And it's really sad what's happened to it. But the whole idea of there's a pharmaceutical, the hidden message is you're so messed up, you need to be on pills. And with kratom used respectfully, and again, there aren't that many initiations or teachings about it that I've come across. It's used in all over Asia. So some people, it becomes an ally. As you said, it helps them come off the synthetic opiates or the hardcore opiates. For some people, they just don't know, and then they develop an unconscious relationship with it. So I think it is an ally for some people. The whole idea of making molecules Schedule 1 is just, how can you make a plant illegal? That's just, again, such arrogance. And again, often there's a hidden agenda, because there is such a thing as Suboxone, or even with CBD, there were all these efforts to the DEA created its own category from CBD, separate from cannabis, and lo and behold, 6 months later, there's a prescription from a CBD out there. So these choices that put molecules in Schedule 1 are not innocent. They have an agenda. All these molecules, again, they can liberate us or they can enslave us. And the whole thing of what makes a molecule Schedule 1, I find really absurd. And it's in Europe for a while, there was this effort, I don't know what the latest is, but they were going to outlaw all herbal medicine, or basically demand that herbal medicine meet the pharmaceutical standards, which, if it's an herb that you can collect in your backyard, no one's going to go out and do a study to prove it works. But it's, again, that disempowerment, that disconnect, that relationship we have with plants is our birthright. And then these companies and powers that be try to insert themselves saying, oh, you can't touch that plant. That's a Schedule 1 plant, and you can't have a relationship. And so they become more and more disempowered. Most people, I live in an earthship, so every day I'm mindful of, the sun and the water and that relationship. And when you live in a big city on the grid and you just flip your switch to turn the heat on and you flip the switch to turn the light on, you're completely enslaved. It's like the Matrix. And there are these forces that just want you to be disempowered. And having that deep relationship with plants, where plants can teach you and you know which plants in the wild you can eat and which you shouldn't eat, we need to reconnect with that. And there, who's keeping us from that? The question is, who's benefiting from that? Yeah, definitely.
It's kind of a no-brainer that we should look into it. Why are you telling me that I can't experiment with my own consciousness? Again, something that grows freely, that I can walk into the backyard or into the cow pasture and pick up these things. But if I get caught with them, I'm going to jail for a long time. And you find out that we hear stories like mine and many people, it's like it pulls you out of the Matrix. Like, hold on, why am I working for this corporation? I don't want to be here. I'm wasting my life. And so you want to pursue your passion. They need oil in their machine that, to keep this thing going. And it's almost, when you see stuff like the Matrix and stuff, all this stuff starts making more sense. And it's like, we have to unplug. And I think unplugging is returning to nature, in every way possible, and having a balance thereof. I know at the end of the episode I did with your wife, we talked a lot about, transhumanism and how we're merging with machines, and how even, there's a part of it, I think it's inevitable, that's where we're headed. But we're taking advantage of it even now. We're using this. We're talking to each other on different parts of the planet, and there's people listening right now from all over the world. We just had a comment from someone in Australia. It's 3:00 in the morning there, and they're up watching this right now. So we're using technology to connect ourselves, but it's like I feel like there should be a balance, and that balance is worth exploring.
Yes, absolutely. I think, again, it goes back to intentionality, whether we're conscious or unconscious. And with consciousness comes responsibility. I think that, just one last comment about the whole Schedule 1, the whole war on drugs, who's benefiting? The company that makes oxycodone, compared to them, the Mexican cartels are Boy Scouts, and they have the lawyers and the money to control legislation. The DEA, their hands were tied. The whole war on drugs, again, is a scam, but they couldn't actually go after the prescription opiates, even though that's killing more people than on all the drugs coming over the border. So there's so many layers to it. The money that people are profiting from getting people addicted to these molecules, from keeping people in the dark about how to respectfully work and reconnect to nature. And so it's really up to us to unplug from the Matrix. And again, that's why I think psychedelic molecules scare people, because when you read about what the army did in the 50s with psychedelics, and all these people that were experimenting then had these come to Jesus moments, these spiritual epiphanies, realizing they couldn't do it anymore. And, the unruliness or the beauty of these molecules, they realized they're not good as a weapon because they don't do what the military ego wants them to do. And the characters involved in that, like there was this guy, Sidney Gottlieb, who was basically one of the inspirations for Dr. Strangelove in the movie Dr. Strangelove, like a movie villain, but he was in real life and he wanted to use LSD as a weapon. But these molecules, sometimes I wonder, why is cannabis letting itself be exploited the way it's being exploited now? And with ayahuasca, like all these people are offering ayahuasca ceremonies. I'm like, well, are you really initiated, or are you just sort of turning your own seeking in? And I'm like, why is this very powerful plant, this very powerful molecule allowing itself to be doing this? And then I have to admit, well, I'm just a human. I don't see the strategy of these plants. But I know they're calling us. I know we're being invited back in.
Yeah.
And that's really the matrix I want to be part of, is the matrix of the plants.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing about the psychedelic thing, is that you can't abuse them. You might be able to abuse marijuana. There's some plants you can abuse. You try to abuse psilocybin, watch what happens. You try to abuse ayahuasca, watch what happens. It's going to eat your lunch, you know, and that's that's a respect that they demand. You know what I'm saying? And so you don't go into it lightly, because you're drinking damnation on yourself, again, going back to that. But they do have the power to help you to unplug. And there's a resurgence of all of this stuff. And I think people want healing. People want to ascend to the next level. They want to get out of the muck and stuff that they were born into. So they're having to do the inner work. And there's so many podcasts like this and documentaries of people whose lives have been radically transformed through returning to nature, through many different means. You know, we're just discussing a couple of them. So I guess we can champion that, you know, and so that people are doing the work. And there is a resurgence. Again, looking back at the 60s when the war on drugs happened, like they're trying to draft people for the war to go fight in the war. And all these hippies are like liberated, like, hell no, we're not going to fight in your war. No way. There's no way we're going to go do this. And so, okay, we're going to take this from you, you know.
Yeah, and that was deeply linked to psychedelics. You know, the psychedelics gave people the awareness to say, oh, no, we're not going to fight in this war. And then, you know, the CIA tried to undermine the anti-war movement by criminalizing these molecules and all sorts of. So, again, it's interesting because psychoactive molecules have been used as weapons for a long time. I mean, not all of them. You're right. Psychedelics are too powerful. But, you know, every monarchy is related to, I would say, opiates. You know, the ancient Egyptians, as I said, the jewelry is full of opium iconography, and that's why they were so rich and could build these pyramids, is because they were dealing opium. And the British took it to the next level. They grew opium in India, but they didn't want the Indians to become lazy, so they sold it in China. The Boxer Wars, you know, was the first war on drugs where the Chinese said, stop selling opium to our peoples. Yeah. So it's always has to do with these power structures. Yep. And now we're being invited, and that's the gift of, you know, ultimately the internet in its infancy was an Aquarian technology where we can have this conversation without an intermediate, and we can connect with people around the world. And of course, then the companies come in and make it corporate again, Facebook and Google and all that stuff. But that's not the original spirit of the internet. Yeah. So we're finding each other, and I think that's the gift, and that's the, you know, that same connectedness that the aromatic molecules that are always surrounding us, flying through the air, taught us, the psychedelic molecules. We're finding each other, and we're teaching each other and reconnecting to what's our God-given right, that inheritance from our ancestors that the powers that be have tried to disconnect us from. And we're all working together all over to reconnect. We're like the mycorrhizome.
Yeah, it's just when we experience, even just when we experience it, or we return even in a small way, it's such a huge victory just to know how far we are separated from it right now. Our food isn't even real, you know. Even a lot of the stuff they tell us is plant-based. It's just chemicals and made up stuff, you know. So when we touch nature in any facet, I think it's a step in the right direction. Again, just going outside, putting your feet on the ground is something that I think anybody can do. Let me ask you about this. What about kava? Have you tried kava or looked into that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I spent some time in Hawaii in medical school, and it was blessed to be there, you know, doing a rotation instead of just being a tourist. And I've tried kava, and to me it's, you know, a mild sedative. It's really slows down the digestion, so that's something I don't like about it. But what's interesting is that, you know, people of Polynesian descent often have these profound reactions to it. And again, there was an initiation, a teaching, and when that got lost, people started using kava as an intoxicant. And I remember talking to a nurse years ago who had worked in the emergency room somewhere in Hawaii, and these people would come in completely psychotic on kava, which again, it's all about the respectful use of the plant. If we're initiated into it properly, it can teach us. But if we treat it with disrespect, it'll teach us in a different way. Yeah.
I ordered some and tried it. I liked it. it doesn't seem to last long though.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hate those things that don't last long. You do it and it's like preparation. It's like you get 10 minutes of it,
Well, and in terms of the molecules, I like, carbanolactones, which are these huge molecules. Like, wow, how is that possibly tickling our brain? It's like with CBD, there's all these aromatic molecules that mimic CBD, like beta-caryophyllene, and so you have two molecules on paper, they look different, but then their dance with our brain is similar. So again, the one thing that interests me about kava is how does this huge carbanolactone molecule, what does it actually do? And there's just this whole universe of, there's, to me, the aromatic molecules are like a vocabulary, like a language, and if we have 26 letters in the English alphabet and there are hundreds of aromatic molecules out there. So imagine if we had hundreds of letters in our alphabet, the poetry we could write, and similar with the psychedelic molecules, there's just so many of them. And I've been very fascinated by the relationship between the aromatic molecules and the psychedelic molecules. And Alexander Shulgin, who was an amazing pioneer, he's the guy who rediscovered MDMA and created dozens of very potent psychedelic molecules himself, has the similarity between certain aromatic molecules and certain psychedelic molecules. And, he says, it's like you can see nature kind of winking at you. And similarly, then I reread Hoffman's book, Plants of the Gods. And again, many of the psychoactive plants from around the world have essential oil in them. So there's this deep relationship about these plants that want to teach us, that want to connect with us, both as spirit teachers, as aromatic teachers, which to me are really on the same spectrum.
Now, when it comes to, the scent and the smell and putting your body in a relaxed state, opening you up and things like that, so many different things that can happen. Have you done any research on the Oracle of Delphi? And it was said, I know there's some debate, but what I've read and studied, it was saying it was like ethane and methane gases that were released and would kind of get them drunk and intoxicated, and they would kind of prophesy and give fortunes and stuff like that. Have you done any research on that, the Oracle of Delphi?
I have a bit. I've been very interested in the Elysian mysteries, which is the story of Persephone and Demeter. And that's actually a pre-Hellenic story, that before the Olympian gods came along, Persephone was actually called Kore, and we see the same archetype with Anana and Isis. And so part of what happened in Delphi had to do with the Elysian mysteries. There was also Eleusis, where they had the temple there. But it's this idea of journeying into the underworld to transform, and that involves the ego death that we talked about. In terms of what the active principle was, that's been speculated. There is this idea that there are these fumes rising from the earth there, and that those could be used as mind-altering molecules. And that's one theory. The other theory is that they use psilocybin mushrooms, that they use even fly agaric mushrooms. Hoffman and a lot of the early psychedelic pioneers speculated about that. And in a way, it's, what it actually was isn't that important, because it reminds us about the importance of ritual, the importance of being initiated. And then, then it's about, well, what are our teachers here and now? What is around us? What is near us? What is calling to us?
Yes, it's interesting, to think, and again, going back to, what it was, if it was anything at the same time,
Yes.
and of an excuse. I've done a lot of research on channeling, if you will, and so putting your consciousness outside of yourself, or using the persona to channel information, or to take the blame off of you or whatever. And people use a lot of drugs to do that. I think religion does that as well. I kind of looked into that. There's a couple questions here in the chat, kind of opened up the chat for some questions. And let's see here. Padawan wants to know, do you know anything about holy basil?
Yeah, again, I don't have a lot of experience with it. It is a plant that was used around where it grows in India and stuff, and has ancient descriptions about it. And again, it's the molecules. I think there is, I have to admit, I'm a little rusty on the background. I think they've now started identifying what the active principle is, but that's one thing that's interesting, is that it's not one of the usual suspects in terms of which molecules there is. And again, I think that we've also seen people misusing it or sort of stumbling into it without the proper initiation. And I have to admit, I don't know if there's any living tradition with it still, but it's again a reminder that being initiated is really important. I think it's very powerful. Some people have incredible experiences with it. I've tried it a few times, and I felt just a little bit, and I was probably, I think, since I wasn't properly initiated into it, it didn't reveal its full magic to me. But I've certainly read about people who then have these crazy experiences. So I think it's again, how do you relate to a sacred power plant? And it's what's there's so many different plant species. Holy basil is in the mint family, Lamiaceae family. Almost each of the major families of plants has psychedelic molecules in it. Even, of course, mushrooms aren't plants. Lichen have, they just found this lichen that has like 5-methoxy-DMT and psilocybin in it. And, you think about what does this lichen do? These lichen are hundreds of years old. And then there's the whole thing about even animals that have psychedelic molecules in it. Near us here, we have the Sonoran desert toad, which produces 5-methoxy-DMT in its venom glands. And that being, this toad lives underground hibernating for 9-10 months of the year. I mean, it's like, what does it, maybe it's dreaming us. And again, even the human pineal gland, we make DMT in our own brain. So to me, that's, the connection, that's the interface between molecule and spirit. And we're all tuned into that wavelength. And again, specifically holy basil, I don't have much experience. I've certainly heard of people having challenges with it.
What's the one that's supposed to be like a really scary psychedelic, some kind of devil's horn or something like that? What is? It's a flower. Well, there are, there are natural psychedelics that have a lot of physical side effects. So the first thing I thought of was datura or Jimson weed or Brugmansia species, which are very rich in scopolamine. And scopolamine it has a lot of physiological side effects. There's the old poem, mad as a hat or blind as a bat because it constricts your pupil, red as a beet because you flush, hot as a hair because it raises your body temperature, and it can cause really rapid heartbeat. And again, insufficient dose, it's fatal. So there's a lot of these molecules. You have to learn how to use them right. Again, being initiated, and a lot of plants that as a kid growing up in Austria say, oh, that's poisonous. Don't touch that. Fly agaric, poisonous. It'll kill you. Belladonna, oh, it'll kill you. Henbane, or what's the other one? The other bane, it's poisonous. And then you realize, no, they're not. I mean, they're poisonous, and that's what they tell the uninitiated, so you don't mess with it. But there is teaching and wisdom to be initiated. And then, of course, there's, what's the scariest molecule? You could say Prozac. I mean, the synthetic molecules and what they do to our brain. Every molecule to me has a spirit. We have a spirit, but dopamine has a spirit. Serotonin has a spirit. So these synthetic molecules, in a way, what's their spirit? They're like these Frankensteinian spirits almost. And let's take ketamine, synthetic molecule, an amazing teacher, but even John Lilly, who was the real pioneer, it almost killed him. So I think that's one of, in a way, the most dangerous molecules are the molecules that separate you. When I said Prozac's the most dangerous molecule, in a way, that's not a joke, because when you get taught, these symptoms you're having, we need to cover them up, that to me is the worst outcome. And I remember years ago being a resident, walking down a hallway, running into a patient of mine who was waiting to see someone else. I'm like, how's it going? And he's like, sitting there drooling on himself, barely awake, eyes like, almost fully closed. He's like, oh, terrible. I'm still feeling something. And I realized, life isn't about being so medicated that you don't feel anything anymore. It's about feeling and feeling it all. And, when we talked about the initiatory experience earlier, no one gets out of this game alive. We have to live life knowing we're going to die. That's really
the greatest spiritual wisdom. And so when we live in this dissociated, the dissociation can happen to us because of trauma. That's something we hadn't talked about. It's a survival mechanism, and evil animals dissociate. When the lion catches the zebra goes limp, or the possum playing dead, that's dissociation. So it's an ancient mechanism. And then, of course, some people seek mind-altering substances, usually not psychedelics because they teach you too much, but alcohol, opiates, they're sort of the numbing molecules so that they chemically dissociate. And now we don't even need to do that because we've got cell phones and everybody's staring at those and they're being dissociated. Years ago, I went to, there's a museum in LA called the Psychiatry and Industry of Death. It's a museum by Scientology or the Citizens Commission of Human Rights, and an anti-psychiatry museum. And in one room, there's all these mind control projects, and we know about MK Ultra and Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA trying to use LSD for mind control and realizing that's not going to work. And then I went there many years ago, and there was just this little sign on the wall saying, "Oh yeah, there's a mind control project called Tower, and the medium of mind control is the cell phone." Well, it's working. That's like the ultimate mind control is cell phones. Everybody's in the matrix.
Yeah. It's stronger. It's stronger than we even think. Like, you can do all the studying you want and have your mind blown about the Illuminati and the cabal and the elite and how they got us, and it's deeper than that. It's deeper than your worst fear. That's why this conversation is so important.
And it could be the 8 days.
Say it again. You broke up right there.
Sorry. The way these devices find their way into our brain is through convenience. So to me, convenience is the 8th deadly sin, because, it's so convenient to have my cell phone, and it's so convenient to have Facebook on my cell phone. And then you're in the matrix, and you're actually paying for it. It's like you're enjoying it, not realizing on what a deep level we're being manipulated. Yeah. And that's again, when we connect with nature through the psychedelic molecules, that's what I want to be a part of, not the modern enslaved matrix.
And I talked about this with your wife a little bit too, and I know there's so much more we can go into this, but with the whole transhumanism, is like they're like replicating spiritual technology, like stuff that exists, right? With the global brain, we are all connected, we're empathic. So they'll take the fact that we are connected, and that's okay. You're connected through Facebook. You're connected if you see my status, if you like it, you agree with, and, so there's so many of these different spiritual technologies. It seems like they're just mimicking through technology. I just want to reiterate to the question I had a while ago. It was, let me see, the Devil's Trumpet, I think is the, what I was thinking of earlier.
Devil's Trumpet is a name for the tree datura. The botanical name is Bergmansia species, which again are full of scopolamine. So again, in South America, it's in some versions of ayahuasca they include it. I forget some of the traditional names now. So again, with teaching, I think it can teach us something. But I know a lot of people, again, you can die from it. And even I've heard of a number of people, even if they don't die from it, they can really get possessed by it, like permanent psychosis and really having. So, some of our teachers are more benevolent, and some of our teachers we need to approach with the greatest respect. So I think what's really important, again, is having proper initiation, especially with plants where you can die from them.
I guess one of the last question here we can end this on. Flying Penguins Martin wants to know, what plant do you find the most influential or beneficial? Like, what is your main go-to plant? I know you have so many, but if there was one that you would like to communicate for yourself or for people to check out.
That's a really tough one. That's like, going to the ice cream store and saying, "Oh, you get to pick one flavor, and I want to taste all of them."
Favorite song, favorite album.
Yeah. This may be an odd one, but I think if you're really ready to get to know yourself, I think a high-quality labdanum. I mentioned labdanum earlier. It's the resin of the cistus plant. The Latin name is Cistus ladanifer. We have one on our essential oil website. It will reveal stuff from the shadow. And I usually say, this, you shouldn't use it without being initiated into it. But again, times are urgent. And when we're really ready to face our shadow, that's the most important spiritual journey. In a way, that's the gift years ago, decades ago, when I worked with clients with addiction already, when they realize, hey, there's a force inside of me that's making me engage in this addictive behavior. That's the beginning. If you survive your addiction, that's the beginning of wisdom, that you have a shadow that can make you do these things that will destroy you. And so then if you want to delve deeper, the labdanum, really, you just smell it and meditate with it, and it will reveal things that may be really hard for you to accept. But I think that's what's really important now. I think the other molecules, they all have a place. They're all amazing teachers. But if I had to pick one right now today, it may sound strange, but I would go with labdanum. And, just smell it, and it'll show you things you might not be ready to see, but that you need to see.
I'm going to check that out. And you can get that off y'all's website. You guys have a lot of stuff on the website. It's really cool, the stuff that you guys offer. Everybody definitely needs to go check it out. If you want to go ahead and plug the website now, you could do that.
Yeah, so the labdanum essential oil is on a website called Kathy's Attars. So that's Kathy is CATHYS and Attar is ATTARS. So kathysattars.com. We have the labdanum there that's from India, really top quality, and many other power teachers. The yarrow essential oil, which we get from France, that's one of my big allies that we talked about at the beginning. And the other website where we have a lot of our classes, and it's also the portal where we offer consultations. And we do consultations online like we're doing now. I mean, this is a conversation, but we do deep consultations online. And the website for that is aromagnosis.com. So aroma, A-R-O-M-A, and gnosis is G-N-O-S-I-S. Aromagnosis.com.
Yeah, guys, make sure y'all go check it out. I'll put all that in the show links as well, show notes. I guess one more question. This is for Christy again. She wants to know, have you had any encounters with angels? Or I'm assuming that my mind, angels are the entities behind the plants as well, kind of similar. Maybe there are other ones on etheric levels of higher density and things like that. But how would you respond to that? Any encounters with otherworldly beings such as angels and those type of things?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we can talk about disembodied beings in general, and then there are entities and beings that exist on the disembodied realms, and they absolutely exist. Certainly there's angelic beings that I've had the privilege to encounter through one of the first people I invited to give a class 10 years ago in New Mexico is a lady from upstate New York, Margaret Donor, and she's an angel channeler, and it was a real epiphany for me. But again, through aromas and psychedelic molecules, you meet the spirit behind the molecule, and then it gets into, well, what do we call them? The Greeks called them the nature spirits that live in trees, the dyads and the naiads and the rivers. So I don't mean to split hairs, but these disembodied beings are everywhere, and some of them are benevolent. Some of them want to reconnect us, and some of them have their own agenda, and they can possess us, whatever you want. There are cases I've seen in my career as a psychiatrist where, not being Catholic or anything, but demonic possession is certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
It's uncanny. Like when you open to those realms, you have to also learn how to protect yourself. Again, that's where the yarrow is really good, because it's a real boundary maker and protects us from. And again, what sort of, again, I'm going to use a word that is ambiguous, but what sort of demons are coming into you through your cell phone?
Oh yeah. For sure. And I think too, there's even the work that I'm trying to push out there is just this notion of what is an angel as well. Mm-hmm. We know what the Hebrew word for angel means. It means messenger. And exactly. So these plants are messengers. They have a message for you if you'll listen. And there's many things. I think even the demons have messages for us. So in a sense, absolutely. they're angels too, because they are carrying a message. It may be a harsh message. It may be, hey, get your life in order. Turn from your sin, deal with it, or if you don't deal with it, it's going to deal with you. That's a hell of a message, and you need somebody to tell you that. And there are beings or entities on waves of density that will deliver that message to you in one shape or form, through addiction, through many different ways. And so I see the beauty in it all, of how it all works together, and they're all messengers. So I think it's really interesting to look at it that way. I
agree with you, and I think that's right. It's just one last thing. It says that that's in a way what our core teaching is. Everything can be a messenger. How do we turn the obstacles in life, the challenges in life, the negative patterns into stepping stones for growth? And the other thing I just want to briefly mention, because he keeps coming up, is, but again, sugar is a profound mind control mechanism. Sugar is a mind control drug. And if you look at all the foods that contain massive amounts of sugar now, when people talk about being in the matrix, I think we're in the matrix through the sugar. The sugar is mind controlling the vast majority of the population right now, and maybe that's a conversation for another time.
What about natural sugar? Where does that fit into the
natural?
conversation?
As I said, I'm a backyard beekeeper, and I would even, tell a diabetic to eat honey, because honey is, they found honey in Egyptian pyramids that was still good to eat. So honey is like sacred food.
For sure.
But refined sugars, the semi-synthetic sugars, I think is mind control, because you can give people Narcan, the anti-opiate medication, and if they're addicted to sugar enough, they go into opiate withdrawal. So sugar, in many ways, numbs you the way opiates do, and it teaches you this dependence on, all these outside sources. Sugar, refined sugar like that does not exist in nature, but of course we're wired for it, and people, companies, powers that be have figured out how to use sugar as a mind control.
It's so weird, because even though you go to the grocery store and try to buy stuff and it says like sugar-free or healthy, and you look at how much sugar is actually in it, like even in water, it's like, how the hell are you putting sugar in the water, man?
Yes.
It's crazy.
Mind control. Yes.
Let me ask you this too. People are wanting to know, how do you spell the labdamen?
Labdanum, Labdanum. And again, there's a lot of labdanum out there that's dead, very poorly distilled, mass-produced. So not to be too egocentric, but if you want high-quality labdanum, go to our website, kathysattars.com. We searched the world far and wide for the best aromas, and you really need a living labdanum, Labdanum, labdanum.
Awesome. Well, I'll link all that in the show notes as well. Florian, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this interview, man, hanging out with you. I'd love to do it again. Just let me know when you want to come on, and there's so much more that we can get into. Thanks so much, and many blessings to you, my friend. Thank you.
Blessings to you, TruthSeekah.
All right, later, brother. Florian Birkmayer. That's Kathy Skipper's husband and business partner, because they're in business together, which that was a really good interview. If you have not heard the interview that I did with his wife, it was only just a couple weeks ago, make sure you go check that out, because that one was really good too. Very similar, but we got into a lot of other aromas and what the aromas do and different things that we can take as well. I did talk about what is it, the teas, the different teas that we can make, and talked about, what was it, we talked about salvia, a little bit about the salvia plant, not the extract. We talked about tobacco being used as something sacred and divine, and healing and cleansing as well, using these things for the right reasons. Another thing we talked about so much, but make sure you go listen to that episode. It was good. Man, just talking about the different plants and our connection to it. Doesn't it make you want to get outside? Doesn't it make you want to communicate? It's so interesting, man. And so he's a neuroscientist, right? And he studies the stuff and our connection to it and to the brain and how it makes you feel. And chamomile is what it was, the chamomile tea, when you're wanting to relax. And again, instead of cracking open a beer or 6 beers, whatever you're doing, brew up some chamomile. Relax. Chamomile, some mix some mushrooms with it, just enough to kind of get into it and feel good. So really interesting. That was cool. There was a lot of stuff that he brought to the table as well, dealing with the CBD. They've been arguing with me, talking about you don't need no THC. You could get the one without THC, does the same thing. I don't think it does. You can try to make you feel better. I tell you what's something is the placebo. It works because I believe it works. It works because a trusted person. The placebo studies are interesting. How much you believe something. Again, if this, I need this to complete me. I need this to help me, and if I take it, it'll help me. It's big. It can be used in your favor. I don't think it's a bad thing, right? No matter what we're doing or taking salt pills or whatever, but or sugar pills. And the placebo lets us know that it works for us, and so it does. So much to say about that. I want to tell some of you guys, definitely from last week in the School of the Mystics, we talked about, we just mentioned a name, and we mentioned Teresa Llaneros, and I actually reached out to her. I see she had a change of heart. Chris Garner told me about that. I checked out her videos and see where she is now, and spoke with her yesterday over the telephone, and I think we're going to do some stuff together. So Teresa Llaneros is supposed to be coming on the podcast, and it's going to be interesting. It seems like she's really denounced a lot of things that she was promoting, and she got to see the dark side of all of this celebrity and Hollywood, and it freaked her out. And she's seen the darkness behind it. So I'm looking forward to that interview. We're going to get that lined up soon, talking about that. You guys know she was close with David Wilcock and Corey Good and those guys, and now she's essentially become their enemy or whatever. They kind of denounced her and tried to make her look like a crazy person and stuff. But once you see, the spirit behind that stuff, it'll freak you out, man. So really looking forward to working with her, having her on the podcast, and maybe doing some stuff in the future as well. So shout out to Chris Garner for letting me know that she had a change of heart as well. And definitely need to catch those people before they go too far over, kind of like what's his name, Stephen Bancar's, somebody like that who is just like against anything spiritual. He's so Christian, he's so earthly minded, he's no spiritual good at all, right? So some people like that. And people send me his work all the time because he's like saying yoga is demonic, meditation's demonic, and anything spiritual is demonic, and that's just silly. And I'll show you the connection where all of this spirituality comes from in the Bible. Crystals, incense, meditation, trances, astral projection, all of this stuff is in your Bible. I hope that would ignite a light within you to want to start reading this stuff within there. And shout out to Richie. What's up, brother? Richie's hanging out. Richie says, great show here. Thank you. But yeah, make sure you guys join us tonight, 7 p.m. Central, for the School of the Mystics. If you're a patron, you get access to that. For any level of giving, even $1 gets you access to that. It's our hangout. It's our just community aspect to what we're building. We do a lot of different things, changes up from week to week, some good conscious conversations. So if you're wanting to get into that, make sure you check it out. It's in the link there. You'll get an email with the link to join. Man, I did my I know I talked about it on the last podcast, but I did the my first flight, got over that, and was awesome, amazing for those of you who didn't hear it. And I overcame my fear of flying, did a long write-up, and pretty much vocalized everything that I wrote up about it, dealing with the fear of flying. So, man, just encourage everybody. 2020 is here, man. It's time for you to step into your calling, the things that you've been dreaming about, the things that you've been wanting to accomplish, man. Pull the trigger, step out, make it happen. You want to start a podcast? Do it. You want to find healing? Do it. You want to go and have your ceremony? Do it. We're hosting our own ceremonies right now. I got one next week. We're going to be doing a ceremony going out into nature with some brothers in the community. So it's going to be good. Then I got another one coming up in April. We're going to do it again. Bunch of stuff that we got planned. I'm working on some courses. I have like 2 different courses that I'm working on. One of them is a metaphysical spiritual practice that you can do to tap into the spirit and it's based off of the scriptures and a few different scriptures that it brings out. I don't know if it's going to be a course or maybe like a 21-day book or whatever to kind of do these practices, but very excited about working on that. And just as kind of the downloads come to me, I try to get them out of me and put them on paper. And so I'm working on that. We're also working on some courses trying to help people manifest their destiny, kind of move some of those blockages out the way. I am available for private sessions, people who want to go on one-on-ones with me, whatever it is that you need help with. If you are dealing with trauma, if you're dealing with blockages, financial, any of those kind of things that you need help kind of getting to the next level, starting that business, starting that podcast, building a website, whatever it is, you guys know what I do, and it's on many different levels. Some people come to me because they want to know how to step out in business on the internet, how to put themselves out there and start booking clients. They want to become a spiritual coach, those type of things. They're doing Reiki, but they don't know where to start getting clients. And so people book me and I help them and I build websites and logos and I do all the branding and all that kind of stuff on the back end. So if you need help with any of those things, you can book me on my website, TruthSeekah.com. All the info is there. We'll do a free 15-minute consultation for those of you who are interested in maybe purchasing a session from me and scheduling one. So, man, a lot going on in 2020. Messing with some new music, meeting a lot of new people. I feel like I'm passing the torch to a lot of people when it comes to the hip hop. Like, I'm still doing some music, but there's a lot of other things that I'm doing first. But there's a lot of young people who I've influenced over the years who are now kind of stepping out themselves to do spiritual hip hop, and they're, I'm kind of coaching them and giving them some pointers and stuff like that. And a lot of them look up to me. So really passing the torch to a lot of young people coming out now, and it feels really cool to know that I've influenced them. I can hear it in their music. It's really cool. So I used to get upset about that, you know what I'm saying? But it's cool to be in a place where, like, that you have an impact and it's lasting, right? And so it's like a ripple effect. We talk about that, the ripple effect from whatever you're doing ripples out to other people, and I think you benefit from that. You benefit from the healing. You benefit from the bad, not benefit, but you experience the bad karma too. People are left in the wake of your mistakes. So that's why we need to do good deeds. We need to help people. We need to build people up, because people are hurting, man. And it all fingers point back to you. So it's a blessing just to be there and being conscious about the work that we're doing.
Yep.
Scott, what's going on, man? You just checking it out, huh?
Yeah, I was trying to connect to a different... I'm supposed to be am I supposed to be at one right here? No. So sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. I'm in the middle of a podcast. Just say hello.
Sorry. Bye-bye.
All right, bro.
Bye-bye. Sorry.
That was Scott. Yeah, we just did an interview as well. That was good. It'll be coming out soon. So let's see. So he's connected to the same one. That's awesome. Look. See, that's the thing about giving out the same link to do these podcasts. Is like people will click it and come in. I remember one time, there was a couple times, but this one time I was supposed to meet with the person, and so I gave them the link, and somebody else had the link too. I think it's because it's the same one. I think it's the same one that we use for the School of the Mystics. So I had my guest. It was me and the guest, and it was before we went live, and I went to go get some coffee, and I came back, and there was a third person here. And so there was this woman just staring at the camera, and she's like sitting on the edge of her bed. And I'm like, okay, so we got, is this your, I didn't know who it was. I was like, is this your partner? We're going to do, so it's two of y'all? Because I've done those interviews too, where they come on with their friend or their spouse. It's like, no, I don't know who that is. I was like, oh, okay. Let's go to a different room. And I had to create another room because random people just kind of popped in on the interview. So I don't want to give y'all no ideas just to jump on when you feel like saying hello in the middle of a podcast. But yeah, it happens. What was the, let me see here, because I know, let me see the name of the interview, because I know we just did it and it was actually really good. Oh yeah. So we just did it in good faith. So me and Scott just did this other interview. What was that? This week actually. It was in good faith. Yeah. Make sure you check that one out too, because it was good. It'll be on the podcasting app soon, so I'll probably put that out tomorrow. Also, it's my birthday tomorrow. I think we're going to do karaoke at the Mexican restaurant. It's kind of what I do. I sing, I rap. Let's do all that kind of stuff. So wish me a happy birthday, guys. With that, I'm going to say peace and shalom, and really enjoyed this episode. Hope you did too. It's good stuff. Peace, guys.
Have a book, product, or service you'd like to promote? Look no further. Ad slots and commercials are now available for you to get the word out about what you do on the TruthSeekah Podcast.
We give you what you need.
Engage the spiritual community and get yourself instantly in front of thousands of listeners who explore the spiritual, paranormal, supernatural, religious, and metaphysical realms. Have your commercial inserted into our entire archive of episodes That includes the one with Jordan Maxwell, James Gilliland, Dr. Michael Heiser, and that weird one with Busy Bone from Bone Thugs and Harmony. Stop sleeping on yourself. Know your worth. Let's get the word out today about what you have to offer. Head on over to TruthSeekah.com and click on Advertise for more info.
Your way is so much higher than mine. So much higher than mine. So much deeper than mine. So much deeper than mine.
Well, that does it for this episode, folks. To hear more episodes of the TruthSeekah podcast, head over to TruthSeekah.com. And if you're wanting to support the show and get rewards, go to our Patreon page at patreon.com/TruthSeekah.